The farmer set the trail camera on a Monday. By Thursday, he had stopped sleeping. By Saturday, he had called the authorities. The bear wasn't eating the apples. Stefan Halser had been farming the orchard for 22 years, the same orchard his father had farmed before him, the same rows of apple trees his grandfather had planted in the 1960s on a hillside in the Styrian countryside of Austria. It was a small operation, 2.5 hectares, a dozen varieties, sold at the local market and to 2 small restaurants in the nearest town. The kind of farm that stayed alive because the person running it worked hard and spent carefully and didn't expect anything remarkable to happen. The bear had appeared sometime in mid-September. Stefan knew bears were in the area. Brown bears had been moving north through the region for years, and the orchards and beehives and sheep farms of the valley had learned to accommodate them, imperfectly. He had found signs before. Overturned compost, claw marks on the barn corner, a stretch of fence pushed down near the eastern edge of the property. He had repaired what needed repairing and thought nothing more of it. What made this different was the pattern. A bear in an orchard in September was not unusual. Fallen apples were reliable calories before winter. A bear came, ate, moved on. The interaction lasted an hour, maybe 2, and the evidence was a scatter of cores and the compacted circles where the animal had sat and fed. Stefan had seen that 3 times in 22 years. This bear was not eating. He first noticed it on the second visit. He had been in the barn late and had seen the movement at the far end of the orchard. A large shape moving between the trees, but not stopping at the fallen fruit. Moving toward the back corner, where the oldest trees stood, the original plantings, 3 of them, 60-year-old specimens with trunks the width of a man's armspan and roots that had been working their way through that particular ground for decades. The bear stopped at the largest of the 3 old trees. It lowered its head and didn't move. Stefan watched from the barn door for 20 minutes. The bear did not eat, did not dig, did not pace or explore. It stood at the base of that specific tree with its head down, as if listening to the ground, and stayed there until the darkness made it impossible to see further. He called his neighbor the next morning and borrowed a trail camera. He mounted it Monday afternoon, aimed at the old tree in the back corner. Motion-activated, night vision-capable, wide angle. The same kind of setup farmers across the region used to document damage claims and monitor livestock. He had expected to catch the bear eating apples. He expected to see what bears do in orchards, the straightforward, explicable behavior of an animal taking advantage of available food. The footage showed something else. The bear arrived Tuesday at 11:43 p.m. It entered the orchard from the eastern fence, walked in a direct line past 6 rows of trees heavy with unharvested fruit, did not pause at a single fallen apple, and went directly to the old tree in the back corner. It stood at the base, head down, nose to the soil at the root line. It stayed for 1 hour and 7 minutes. Then it left. Stefan watched this footage Wednesday morning at his kitchen table, eating breakfast with the laptop in front of him. He played it twice. He went out to the orchard after breakfast and looked at the base of the old tree. The soil at the root line was slightly disturbed. Not dramatically, not dug up, but the way soil looks when something has been pressing into it repeatedly. The roots themselves were intact. No obvious damage to the bark or the tree. He went back inside. He set the camera to record the next night. The bear came back Wednesday at 11:51. Same entrance point, same direct line, same tree, same posture. Head down, motionless, for 53 minutes. Thursday morning, Stefan sat at the kitchen table for a long time before he ate breakfast. He was a practical man. He had 22 years of farming behind him, a working knowledge of the land and the animals on it, and a sensible aversion to overreading things. Bears did unusual things sometimes. That was the nature of wild animals. They had their own reasons which were not always legible. But this bear had walked past hundreds of kilograms of ripe autumn apples on consecutive nights to stand motionless at the base of one specific old tree. He thought about what was under that corner of the orchard. He thought about it for a long time. Then he called the Farm Association's environmental advisor. He described what the camera had shown. He said he wanted someone to take a look at the ground near the old trees in the back corner of the orchard. He specifically mentioned the tree the bear kept returning to. The environmental advisor arrived Friday afternoon with a soil probe and a testing kit. She was a young woman named Clara who had been doing farm environmental assessments in the region for 4 years, and she had heard stranger referral reasons than a bear's behavior. She was professional about it. She didn't dismiss it, she didn't focus on it. She focused on the ground. She probed the soil at 3 points around the old tree's root system. At the first 2 points, the probe returned normal readings, slightly compacted, the ordinary chemistry of an old orchard floor. At the third point, on the northern side of the root ball where the bear's tracks were most concentrated, the probe hit something at 70 centimeters depth. Something metal. She marked the point and extended her probe to map the edges. The object was large, at least 1 meter across, she estimated, possibly larger. She took a soil sample from the surrounding material and ran a field test. The sample turned the indicator strip a pale yellow-brown that was not the color it should have been. She looked at Stefan, who had been watching from a few meters away. "I need to ask you about the farm history," she said. "Specifically, was there ever a fuel storage tank on this property?" Stefan was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father had a diesel tank for the machinery. He buried it in the back of the orchard when he built the barn in the late 1970s. When I took over, I ran new fuel lines from a surface tank by the barn. The old buried tank, we decommissioned it." A pause. "At least, I thought we decommissioned it." The official inspection the following week confirmed what Clara had found. The old underground storage tank was still in place, a 2,000-liter steel tank installed approximately 1978, decommissioned in the early 1990s by the simple process of having the remaining fuel pumped out and the fill pipe capped. Standard practice for the time. Not standard practice now, when regulations required removal. Over 3 decades of soil chemistry and winter freeze-thaw cycles, the tank had corroded. Slowly, at the seam on its northern face. The leak was small. The inspectors estimated no more than a few liters had escaped over the full 30-year period. But those few liters had spread through the sandy soil of the orchard floor in a thin contamination plume, following the path of the underground water movement. The plume ran north from the tank, directly toward the natural spring at the orchard's northern boundary. The spring that fed the small stream that ran along the property edge and that eventually joined the valley's main watershed. The plume had not yet reached the spring. It was, the hydrogeologist brought in for the assessment, estimated 4 to 6 meters from the spring's underground source. If the tank's corrosion had continued at its current rate, contact with the spring water was estimated at 3 to 5 years away. Stefan stood in his orchard and looked at the old apple tree, the one his grandfather had planted, the one whose roots had been growing through the contaminated soil for decades, drawing water from the plume margin, the one the bear had been returning to night after night and pressing its nose against the earth at the root line. A brown bear's sense of smell is estimated at 7 times more powerful than a bloodhound's. A bloodhound can detect scent through concrete. Petroleum compounds have a distinctive volatile signature that disperses upward through soil and plant tissue. The old apple tree, its roots in direct contact with the contamination plume, was producing trace volatile compounds in its root exhalations and in the soil atmosphere immediately around its base. Not enough for Stefan to smell. Not enough for Clara's basic field kit to flag without a specific test. Enough for whatever the bear was using when it walked past 100 fall apples and went directly to that corner of the orchard. The remediation project took 8 weeks. The tank was removed. a careful extraction that required partial excavation of the root zone of the old tree, which was done by hand to preserve as much of the root structure as possible. The contaminated soil around the former tank was excavated and removed to a licensed facility. The area was backfilled with clean material and left to settle. The old apple tree survived. It had been growing through low-level contamination for 30 years and showed no outward sign of stress. Old orchard trees were resilient in ways that surprised even the arborist brought in to assess it. Roots pruned, crown inspected, the tree was cleared as healthy. It would produce fruit again the following season. Stefan went to market the following autumn with a clean environmental assessment and the same fruit he had always sold. He did not tell his customers the story. It was not the kind of story that helped you sell apples. But he thought about it sometimes when he was working that corner of the orchard, which he did carefully now, the way you work ground that has shown you something. He had submitted the trail camera footage to the Regional Wildlife Authority as part of the incident documentation. A bear researcher there had reviewed it and added a notation to the regional data on brown bear behavior in agricultural settings. She called Stefan to follow up. She wanted to know more about the approach pattern, the bear's route, the time of entry, the duration of the stationary behavior. She had been documenting instances of brown bears showing sustained interest in specific agricultural locations, behaviors that didn't match feeding or territorial patterns. This case was one of the clearest examples she had seen. "What do you think it smelled?" Stefan asked. "Volatile organic compounds from the petroleum," she said. The tree roots would have been carrying traces up through the root system and releasing them at the surface. Not much, not enough for us to detect without a specific test. But a bear's chemoreception is not comparable to ours. What's a trace to us may be a clear signal to them. Stefan thought about that. About the bear arriving at midnight, walking past the apples, going to the tree, pressing its nose to the root system and waiting. 53 minutes. An hour and 7 minutes. As if waiting for confirmation of something it already suspected. "Did it come back after the remediation?" she asked. He had checked. The camera had been running through the excavation and the backfill and the first weeks after. The bear had not returned after the tank was removed. The last footage of it at the old tree was from the night before the excavation began, as if it had already known what would happen next and had no further reason to come. He told her that. She wrote it down. "One more thing," he said. "The apples near that tree. The ones in that corner of the orchard. The bear never touched them. Not one." He paused. 3 consecutive visits. Hundreds of apples on the ground. It walked past all of them. She was quiet for a moment. "We don't know whether that's related to the contamination or not," she said carefully. "No," Stefan said. "We don't." He went back out to the orchard after the call. The old tree was budding, the first new growth since the root work, the tree resuming its ordinary life in ordinary soil. The corner of the orchard looked like the rest of it. Rows of trees, fallen leaves, the quiet order of a farm in the off-season. He picked up an apple that had fallen near the old tree's roots. He turned it over in his hands. He put it in his pocket. Whatever the bear had known was no longer in the ground.